Story Corner, presented by Jennifer. Spirit Animals, Book 1, Wildborn, Chapter 12, Boulder City. Okay, feel free to check out my other spirit animal videos. And for those of you who have not yet seen the first few videos for Wildborn, I suggest you go view those now, as this is a continuation of that story. Four horses cantered along a faded trail bordered by low, scrubby bushes. A long, angular ridge occasionally gave variety to the dry, rolling terrain. Rollan rode at the back of the line. A week ago, he had never sat astride a horse. After several days in the saddle, the soreness was wearing off, and he was growing more comfortable with his mount. The horses were all chargers, bred by the Greencloaks not only for power and endurance, but also for intelligence and loyalty. Rollan supposed it paid to have horses furnished by animal experts. Conor was up ahead, then Meilin beyond him, and finally Tarlik in the lead. All wore green cloaks. Olivine had provided Rollan with a gray one. The commander of the Green Cloaks had struck a deal with him. If Rollan helped retrieve this first talisman, he would receive enough money to last him a year, along with the official friendship of the Green Cloaks, meaning he could stay in the towers and, a point Rollan was careful to include, eat their food. Rollan would receive nothing more until all the talismans were accounted for, in which case the Greencloaks would buy him a manor and provide him with enough money for 5 lifetimes. Olivine had stressed that at any point throughout the process, Rollan could renounce his rewards and take up the Green Cloak instead. With the crest of a long and gradual rise approaching up ahead, Tarlik slowed his mount to a walk and the others followed his lead. Overhead, Essex gave a cry and came spiraling down to land on Rollan's shoulder. Meilin wore Jin on her hand. Tarlik's otter lay curled up at the back of his saddle, and Brigand loped tirelessly alongside Conor. From the top of the rise, Rollan looked down with the others at the rustic settlement. A few dirt streets crisscrossed the imperfect row of adobe buildings. People bustled along with a few wagons, horses, and a handful of dogs. Despite the activity, the crowds were nothing compared to what Rollan was used to in Cornova. None of the buildings looked very large to him, and several of them were in shoddy condition. The low wall around the community was made of stacked stones, which Rollan found downright pathetic. Our first destination, Tarek announced, Boulder City. Pebble Village would ring truer, Rollan scoffed. It's also called Sambergech, Tarek went on. Non-natives tend to prefer the nickname. The towns are small here in the far west of Amaya. Few care to have brave the dangers beyond the more settled region of the continent. The folk who live here are from a sturdy stock. It would be sensible to avoid a mocking tone. I see why Amaya is dubbed the New Land, Meilin said. No section of Zong is this uncivilized. Zong is known as the Walled Land, Tarek said. The territory within the wall is highly developed and well tended. But I have seen corners of the continent beyond the wall that make Boulder City appear refined. This is where we'll find the bear and the raccoon? Conor asked. If Lenore and Alven interpreted the vision properly, Tarek said. Barlow and Monty used to be green cloaks at Sunset Tower. They broke their oaths to become explorers. They spent the last 15 years roaming the wilds of western Amaya. Few, if any, have traveled this continent as widely. I've not met them personally, but by reputation, they're experienced outdoorsmen. Barlow's companion is a bear, and Monty's is a raccoon. Perhaps they've come across RX in their wanderings. That's the hope, at any rate. How do we know they'll be here? Rollan asked. We don't, Tarek admitted. Green cloaks try to stay aware of their own, present and former. Last we had word, Barlow and Monty had established a trading post in Boulder City. If they're not here, we'll pick up a trail. They rode down a slope, through a gap in the low stone wall, and onward into the town. Rollan noticed the cold stares from the people on the street in the doorways. Most eyes dwelled on the green cloaks worn by the other members of the group. Nearly all the people in view were men, the majority hardy and weathered, with threadbare clothes and rough beards. Tarek pulled up in front of the largest building in town, a dingy white two-story structure with amber-tiled roof. A covered wooden boardwalk wrapped around the establishment, and a sizable sign proclaimed it the trading post. In a flash, Tarek's otter became a design on his arm. Send your falcon aloft, the green cloak suggested to Rollan. Conor, leave Brigand outside. Take to the Rollan began, but his falcon sprang into flight before he could finish. Would you mind guarding the horses, Brigand? Conor asked. The wolf sniffed Conor's mount, then sat nearby. Will there be any trouble? Rollan wondered. He wore a knife at his hip. Living on the streets, he had always carried a small blade of some sort, but the green cloaks had supplied him with the finest he had ever owned. The weapon on his belt was a true dagger, well made and keen, almost a short sword. He had a much smaller knife tucked in his boot. Perhaps, Tarek said. Some former green cloaks hold grudges. Interesting, Rollan muttered. Should we take off our cloaks? Conor asked. Never out of shame or to win favor. Tarek said. It sets a bad precedent. We must stand behind who we are and what we represent. But what do you represent? Rollan wondered. He watched the group of surly, squinting men go out of their way to walk in a wide circle around the green cloaks. An older man leading a laden mule paused to consider them, one fist on his hip. Across the street, hesitant faces appeared in the windows. Everyone is staring, Conor muttered. Then let's give them something to watch, Tarek said, leading the way into the trading post. He wore his sword strapped across his back. Meilin brought her quarterstaff. Rollan noted that Conor left his battle axe with his saddle. Everything screeched to a halt in the trading post as they entered. Diners at the bar paused mid-bite, and trading at the general store came to a dead stop. In the silence, Rollan noticed plentiful animal hides on display, along with outdoor gear and rows upon rows of axes, swords, and other weapons. Tarek strolled over to the counter in the general store. Several big men made way for him, their gaze ranging from suspicious to outright hostile. Behind the counter, a balding man with a mischievous face surveyed the newcomers. "Green cloaks," he groaned with a smirk. "Official business or just passing through?" "I'm here looking for 2 former colleagues, Barlow and Monty," Tarek replied. The man behind the counter looked perplexed for a moment, then gave a nod. "Been some time since those 2 wore much green. Can't claim to have seen either of them lately." "That's so," Tarek asked. "Do they still own this trading post?" "They do," the man replied. "It's the most successful emporium hereabouts, which frees them up from minding the day-to-day operations." Rollan heard a brief uproar behind him. He pivoted to see Essex glide towards him through the open door. The falcon landed on his shoulder. Forcing a smile, he stroked the bird with the back of one knuckle, trying to act as though the appearance had been expected. As usual, Essex was out to prove she could go wherever she wanted, when she wanted, regardless of instructions. Both Tarek and the man behind the counter stared at him. Rollan waved a hand. "Go ahead, don't mind us." Tarek turned back to face the shopkeeper. "How long would I need to wait for their return?" The man folded his hands on the countertop. "They own property all over. They don't share their schedules with me, and it isn't my place to ask. Depending on the season, the 2 of them can be absent for months at a time." "He's lying," Rollan blurted, regretting the words as soon as he had let them escape. It was just so obvious. With Essex on his shoulder, his perceptions felt heightened, and his alertness sharpened. He could read the way the shopkeeper licked his lips at the wrong time, glancing away at the wrong time. "I agree," Tarek said calmly. "What do you mean I'm lying?" the man sputtered. Rollan could feel the men behind him shifting. "What's the lad playing out?" one particularly large guy muttered to his neighbor. "He's got himself a gray falcon." "Your bosses aren't in any trouble," Tarek said. The man behind the counter seemed to take some courage from all the grumbling. "Thanks for the insurance, stranger. Look, I'm not sure where you're from, but around here we aren't fond of green cloaks butting into our affairs." Some of the surrounding men muttered words of agreement. "No regard for privacy. Holding up the line. Go drink your nectar." Tarek stepped away from the counter. He only raised his voice enough to be heard. "I'm here on orders from Sunset Tower. If any man cares to get in my way, step forward." Rollan noticed that Tarek didn't reach for his sword. He made no threatening movements. But he was a tall man with a serious face, and there was no humor in his tone. The man who had grumbled found other places to look. Tarek turned halfway back to the counter. "I was trying to be discreet. Apparently, that isn't how things are done here. I need to see Monty and Barlow on official business. The orders came straight from the top. You're not doing them any favors by getting in the way. We'll return in force if necessary. They might as well get it over with." An outburst of murmurs followed the new explanation. The man behind the counter ducked out of sight as if retrieving something from down low. Rollan heard faint footfalls. "He's running." Tarek leaned forward, looking over the wide counter. Showing unexpected speed, the shopkeeper popped up near the end of it and leapt nimbly over and yanking open a window. Rollan ran to chase him. Tarek moved to follow as well, but some of the large customers stepped in his way. With a burst of light, Lumino appeared, and Tarek started throwing punches. Essex flew out the window ahead of Rollan, who climbed through in time to see the shopkeeper duck behind the trading post. Rollan hit the ground running. By the time he made it around the back of the building, the shopkeeper was on barrow, jumping for the bottom railing of a second-story balcony. Before he could pull himself up, X swooped at him, talons extending and raking his arm. The man dropped to the ground. Rollan kept coming. The man ran towards the far side of the back of the trading post, but stopped short as Brigand raced around from that direction. The shopkeeper raised his hands as the wolf approached. "All right, chase over. Leave me be." Conor came running around the corner from the exact same direction as Brigand, just before Rollan caught up with the shopkeeper. "Why'd you run?" Rollan accused. Brigand moved in close enough to sniff the man, who flinched away. "I've dealt with too many green cloaks in my day," the man replied. "Listen, I have a thing with wolves, especially getting eaten by them. Can you call yours off?" Brigand wasn't growling, but the big animal stood close and had his hackles raised. "Not so fast," Rollan pressed. "Who are you?" The man sighed in resignation. "Guess I've neglected to introduce myself."